Last fall, mass protests broke out across Lebanon. They lasted for months with rallies by day and often clashes by night. Now, after months of lockdown, protesters and violence are returning to the streets. Locals say the pandemic has deepened the problems already devastating the country, now in its worst economic crisis in decades.
We lost our life savings. I don't know what we will do.
People here blame corruption among the political elite for the country's rapidly growing impoverished class. Transparency International says Lebanon's system protects corrupt individuals and that nearly 90% of its citizens think the problem is being addressed badly. Analysts say that without a rapid solution, Lebanon is likely to grow even more volatile.
All the incidents of violence that we had in these 6 months or so since the protest started were directly related to a sudden drop in the value of the currency, and then people getting really angry.
In Iraq, months of protests started last October and led to hundreds of deaths. Now, some protesters still occupy city squares, while others stay home because of the pandemic. Rallies and sporadic clashes continue. The new Prime Minister, Mustafa al-Kadhimi, has promised to meet some key demands, saying he will release jailed activists, fight corruption, and plan new elections, and fight the financial and security crises gripping the country. But activists are skeptical, saying that after 17 years of failed attempts to build an equitable democracy, they will stay on the streets until all of this happens. And analysts add that it's not just protesters calling for economic justice.
And that sense of despair and disillusionment turning into outrage and anger, I would say, is felt by both protesters and those who are not in the streets. It's generally accepted by society that the leaders who came to bring Iraq governance and democracy in 2003 have not done that yet.
Iraq is an oil-rich country where the poverty rate is expected to increase to 40% this year, according to the United Nations. It is wrestling with collapsed oil prices and the threat of a resurgence of Islamic State militants. Activists in both Iraq and Lebanon say they are waiting for the pandemic to ease so they can fully resume their fight.
The revolution will not stop. We will go back to the streets and take our rights.
In solidarity with U.S. protesters who rose up after the death of George Floyd, activists in Iraq, Lebanon, and beyond are online tweeting, "We also want to breathe." And as pandemic fears give way to emerging protests around the world, analysts say that Lebanon and Iraq, both with governments on the brink, will have to reform significantly or face collapse. Heather Murdoch reporting for VOA from Istanbul with Ali Khadr in Beirut.